This is the Krillcast Live. I am Chris.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is the, I believe, 10th episode of Printed and Pressed, our book podcast with some extra surprise books thrown in there, which are not
Mhm.
part of the official book club. But if you look on Goodreads and bookclubs.com or whatever website we're using these days, it exists. It's in the list. This one is The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. And it was, in fact, my choice of book this week, which is why Will's not here because he hates me.
Mm.
Just kidding. But I don't believe really enjoyed this book. So we're going to throw his rating for this book out. And in the
Well,
meantime,
he didn't
Andrew
have
and
time
I,
to finish reading it, Chris. He was pretty busy. So don't go throwing Will under the bus like that. All right.
he doesn't
It
care if
was
I
all
throw him under the
fair.
bus as long as he doesn't have to be here. So the specific version of the book that I read had some extra pieces, which actually this
Yeah.
website, I don't know what Gutenberg is, but they have a lot of preserved historical books and texts and stuff. It's actually where I got the preserved version of Wreck of the Titan we reviewed on Sunday. No, there's no octopus in it, as Will pointed out, but it was a very interesting comparison. If you want to watch that, the previous video on that book is from Sunday. Watch it after this one. It's on Rumble, YouTube, and Twitter. But we're here to talk about The Prince, a
Hmm.
very famous work by a man named Machiavelli, who
He's very
is
misunderstood.
very misunderstood, kind of a prophet a little bit of what happens
No,
later.
no, not necessarily a prophet. I would say he's just a very astute uh, strategist.
He recognizes how easily power can be abused, and also he recognizes how a system should hold itself together if things are done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly he. I wouldn't say the only reason I would say he's not a prophet is he's not really predicting specifics or anything. He's just purely talking tactics and stratagem. Like that's why I would say that.
Yeah, fair enough. But let's get into it. So
Yeah.
the book actually, because it's old, they have like a baseline of his life written out,
Hmm.
and a good guess as to why he wrote the book. Which spoiler alert, he probably wrote the book because at least according to the version I read, they said that they handed him something to do so that he wouldn't incidentally cause a revolt from the people that still followed him, kind of like
Well,
Napoleon did later on.
there was
Where
also the there was
go
also
ahead.
the take that he was writing it to kind of advertise his exploits to potential rulers, and specifically he Florence, where his hometown basically. So
But it's clear that he has a respect for the Medici family because he does write from the perspective of dedicating this book to the Medicis, who did come back to power and exiled him, but then also brought him back to let him write this book.
the context in my copy, because we had different copies,
Yeah.
was I mean, the Pope at the time was part of the Medici family. It was his loyalty to Florence, so he wants Florence to
Was
succeed.
it Julius? I'm trying to remember which one.
I think it was Julius. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to, specifically market this to Florence. And
Oh,
Pope Alexander.
Alexander.
No, that
Was
was, or was he the second Alexander? Because Cesare's father was Alexander. So you need to,
yeah, and then there's Pope Julius too. Yeah,
yeah.
so they're both in this book.
So you have it though where he's an Italian first is the proper way to word it, because he's sick of seeing Italy suffer poor rulers,
Especially
and
foreign ones.
especially foreign ones who oppress Italy and cause it so much strife and internal conflict. So that's kind of the viewpoint he's taking. That's his perspective in this book. He's trying to tell all these Italian rulers how they should behave, and his most favorable one, as you can tell when you read this, is Cesare Borgia, who he's convinced would have become king of Italy if only he had not had the one thing that was never planned for occur to him, which was being ill the moment his father, the Pope, died.
Yeah.
Like, that's the one issue.
And there's actually it's a funny thing that I read this at the same time that I'm in the current reading through Josephus's book The Jewish War, because it's very clear that he takes at least a little bit of inspiration from Josephus and some of the things he writes. Kind of talking about how the Romans, who had taken over all of the area for a period of time, found a lot of unrest because of the way that they governed the various nations they had taken over. And Josephus also points out the same things, which is really oddly funny that I was reading them at the same time. But at the end of this book, because I know you picked up on his admiration for Cesare.
It's throughout the book, yeah.
He actually spends a good 30 pages in the version that I was reading, discussing Castruccio Castracani, who was kind of a bizarre rise to prominence in Italy. And because you don't have this in your book, I'm going to summarize. But essentially, this guy, Castruccio Castracani, not even related to the family of his last name, was found at an abbey where something like that, where a priest and a nun, who were brother and sister, I believe, were living, and they ended up raising this guy to have the name of their father, who had passed away young. And then he ends up taking over most of the area before he dies, but then he dies young and leaves the area to a noble who was the son of the mentor who had mentored him, which is funny. But he basically spent his whole time building up this area and then leaving it to the son of his mentor when he dies young from probably some disease. It basically says he has chills and then dies, but he did everything right. And then because he died young, he never got to see the end of his conquest. And because he left it to somebody in less capable hands than himself, because he was the ideal version of what he outlines in The Prince.
Well, I mean, that's typical when you look at the examples he's given in his book, even, that the person who founds the kingdom is always well respected. But then, when they have to hand it off to the next person, they're usually not nearly as capable, and they don't have the legacy that a longer bloodline has. So that's the make or break is your succession, right?
If this guy hadn't done what he did, though, the son of his mentor probably would not have done anything. Like, he would have not had, he would have probably even lost the country he started with, the Lucca area. And basically, he would have conquered everything in the area had he not died young. He became a Roman senator at one point. He ended up sending in cavalry to support the Pope and was probably one of the only reasons the Pope survived that battle. But he really, really was well respected. Castruccio Castracani, I had to look him up because I was very confused about the whole situation. But this guy really resembled everything that Machiavelli respected in his book, The Prince. But anyways, if you want to see like the story of opposites, he writes this other part called The Description of the Methods Adopted by Duke Valentino when Murdering Vitellozzo Vitelli, Aliverato de Fermo, whatever. This is bizarre. It's a discussion on
it involves the Orsini, man. It's going to be bad advice.
The whole situation here is bad. And then he follows that up with possibly one of the best to resemble what he wanted. So these were really good additions to the book. I was initially like, why are these here? But then after reading them, I could see why. But anyways, let's kind of go through chapter by chapter since they kind of cover a lot of things.
Let's just go through. Let's keep it on the table of contents. It'll make it the easiest just to discuss, I think. So.
And I'm gonna grab my copy of the book real quick so you can talk about chapter 1. I'll be right back. It's right here on my shelf.
Okay. The first chapter is how many kinds of principalities there are and by what means they are acquired. So, if I remember correctly, Chris, there's basically two types of principalities. There's the ones that you inherit because you have that long hereditary bloodline already, and then there's the ones where you had to take them by force.
Acquired and hereditary.
Yeah.
Those are the two options essentially, as far as like kingdoms go.
And they're very different. And I think, would you agree that he kind of takes the perspective of
it also says republics. There are republics or principalities, and then there are two types of principalities. Okay, so yes, I remember.
Yeah, well, because he's ignoring republics for the most part in this book. He talks about writing elsewhere for republics. Right. just to add to that, though, I would say his general theme throughout this book is to kind of encourage rulers that respect the values of Republican life, I would say, so that they don't revolt against you.
Republican as in like a version of governing state versus like Republican as in a political party. He's not obviously
yes,
that comes way later.
Well,
this is like a
we're talking about a republic as in the Roman Republic or the Republic in Florence, where
I just want the algorithm to misunderstand us.
That is fair, Chris. That is very fair. But he basically tells them a lot within this book about don't violate the rights that people think they are owed, right?
Right, exactly. And when acquiring territory, slow change is usually easier to maintain than immediate, unless you're going to force everybody to bow under your rule and you're going to live there. That's one different way.
And there's two ways to acquire your principality if it's not hereditary, and one of them is through just pure violence. You've taken over, right? And then the other one is you're just so popular the people demand you as the ruler.
Well, I mean, he does kind of go into the Roman way of doing things too, where they essentially leave the existing government in place and they just pay taxation to the owner, I guess we want to call it that. But that's still different because that's technically a republic.
I thought that was within another chapter that he gets into that.
So chapter 2 is concerning hereditary principalities, and he says basically that the difficulties in maintaining a principality which is inherited through hereditary means is much simpler than trying to maintain something that's not a hereditary principality.
The key point here is the people already
they're used to it.
They have an acceptance of you, right? And your biggest concern if you are hereditary is to not be hated. That's the moral of that entire chapter is whatever you do not become hated and despised.
The other half of that, and he doesn't necessarily go into this, but I got the feeling that he was kind of saying this, is in a hereditary line, the people are excited for the potential change of the bad aspects of the previous king, and also the idea of a new person coming in with their own new mixed bag of abilities and weaknesses.
When they feel like they're not getting what they want, they're more than happy to put someone else in and have that new ruler high until they realize that they're not getting what they want from the new ruler as well.
It's like the honeymoon.
They have that honeymoon phase, and then the new ruler, that's why it's hard to become hereditary in the first place, because many rulers are not capable of actually giving the goods that the people wanted, and then they just are like, okay, it's no better anymore, so let's go with a new one. And sometimes hereditary rulers are brought back. That is another thing.
There was a poll done, and I'm not sure where it came from. It was in Polish, but it was about the Habsburgs and whether or not people would be willing to essentially remove their entire parliament and bring back the Habsburgs. And the poll was overwhelmingly yes. They wanted to demolish their parliament, bring back the Habsburgs.
I just want to point out that it's not going to be much different than what it is right now, because
it did make me laugh.
So many of the really uber wealthy in Europe are related to the Habsburgs.
I know. It just made me laugh that they're so willing to just dissolve their democracy. And bring it back.
It's because they realize they don't have a very good democracy right now.
Fair enough. It just made me laugh to see that poll. It's like, yeah, we don't care. We just bring back royalty. All right. That actually kind of proves Machiavelli's point, though, is hereditary lines are much easier and more popular because of their long standing and the tradition and the culture. All right, so concerning mixed principalities, that's the third part. It's where, let's see here. I'm trying to remember.
These early chapters are a little bit more tedious, I would say, because he really starts. I think the wisdom has really dropped later on.
Oh, this is because it's a new principality where it's mixed between the old collective and the new collective. All right, that's right. I was trying to reintroduce this chapter to myself because I couldn't remember what the heck this one was even about. But it's like discussing how France loses Milan, about the different dukes and various
Mm-hmm.
rulers. I don't think there's a lot of value in
There's
this chapter necessarily.
generally speaking, there isn't a lot in these early ones. He's really setting the stage for your circumstances, I would say.
Yeah, so it also this one does also discuss how when a prince is new to a principality, it's
Mhm.
best that they move to the new area they've conquered recently than
Yeah.
to stay where they're known, because it's hard to rule from afar.
Yeah, I mean, he's talking, you need to live where you rule, kind of thing. He talks about how colonies are better than standing armies at holding the land. That's one of his big principles is if you have to rely on soldiers within that territory, it's a huge resource sink, and it doesn't build loyalty within that community. You come off more as an oppressor. Whereas if you move civilians there and then they kind of blend into the fabric of the city, you now have a loyal, just I guess, customer base for your leadership in said city. So it's a lot better for you to have people who actually want to vote for you as ruler, in a sense, by not taking up arms against you or actually taking arms up in your defense. So that's why he's a big proponent of actually living where you conquer and rule, or putting colonies there.
So then he goes on to discuss in the next chapter the kingdom
Yeah.
of Darius, conquered by Alexander, did not rebel against
Mm-hmm.
the successors of Alexander at his death.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting because it's very different from conquering somebody in Europe, where you have long-standing formed principalities where there is a royal bloodline, and
Mm-hmm.
even if you've conquered the area, the royal bloodline is still there.
Well, you're burying the lead here. It's because Darius was the type of emperor who used magistrates.
Yeah,
There was no,
and Alexander kind of left those magistrates when he conquered, didn't he?
or he could put, no, you can replace a magistrate
Right.
very
Okay.
easily without the local populace being upset because it's not a hereditary title.
True.
So there's no loyalty to a name, there's no legacy associated with that local governance. It's very top-down centralized government. So because of that, you gotta take this into account too. If you're being conquered, is if you have magistrates, there's no local loyalty. So it's even harder for you to have a rebellion against the person who just conquered you. That's one of the benefits of having local dukes and lords, is they're also fighting, and the people have that loyalty to the family that has ruled them for however many
You're
decades.
saying dukes versus magistrates.
Yeah, dukes versus magistrates. There's more loyalty to a duke, but that's also a
That's why
headache
I'm
to
saying
you.
that's why the European area is harder to conquer,
Yeah.
especially when you consider that the royal bloodline extends out to the dukes, duchess, etc., 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 and there's always an heir to the kingdom with
Mm-hmm.
which a rebellion could rise to the
And
conquerors.
replace you with. They can always bring back. That's why later on he talks about when you take over he's talking about Cesare Borgia, right? And how the places he took over, he effectively killed the entire family that could
Right.
be used to replace him. So if there's no family to be brought back into power, then people are less likely to try to usurp the power from you and question your authority.
So then we move on to, let's see here, concerning the way to govern cities or principalities which lived under their own laws before they were annexed.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read this the first time, I was a little confused, but after reading the 2 pages that exist here, because a lot of these are really short chapters that are straight and to the point, which I do appreciate.
No, he's very articulate and not fluffing any of it.
But basically what he's saying is, I'll just read directly from this chapter.
Yeah.
It says, okay, it's a long run-on sentence. It says, whenever those states which have been acquired as stated have been accustomed to live under their own laws and freedom, there are 3 courses for with those who wish to hold them. The first is to ruin them, which we've already discussed.
Mm-hmm.
The next is to reside there in person, which is something we've already discussed. The
Yeah.
third is what the Romans did, which is to permit them to live under their own laws, drawing a tribute and establishing within it an oligarchy, which will keep it friendly to you.
Yeah, and I mean, this is every merchant republic that ever existed to a certain extent. It's also, you'll see it today, right? That's basically what Singapore is. it's not ruled by anybody, but it's like a city state. Or you could say Hong Kong, which was now brought back under the Chinese rule in a sense. So these small city states can be very powerful when you let them kind of operate independently, because no one has negative policies towards those jurisdictions.
Right.
They usually have very successful merchant fleets because of the lesser tax burdens and lesser rules. Because it's just a city, everyone kind of knows each other a bit more, and they're not trying to take the money out of the city. So it's kind of a lesson that even plays out to today, where you can see those city states that are very successful.
And then here's the last paragraph really says it all here. But when cities or countries are accustomed to live under a prince and his family is exterminated, they being on the one hand accustomed to obey and on the other hand not having the old prince, cannot agree in making one from amongst themselves and do not know how to govern themselves. For this reason they are very slow to take up arms, and a prince can gain them to himself and secure them much more easily. This is what Alexander the Great essentially did by replacing the magistrates.
Yeah.
Next page, concerning new principalities which are acquired by one's own arms and ability. I think this is basically just discussing, conquering neighboring nations, taking over.
It's best to talk about this one and the next chapter at the same time, because this next chapter is concerning new principalities which are acquired either by the arms of others or by good fortune.
Oh, this is like the whole.
It's better to have your own soldiers versus auxiliaries from another group versus mercenaries. So when you conquer something using only through the help of others, you are then immediately at the mercy of those same others the second you are in power. So your position is immediately precarious, and no one respects you. That's the other issue.
It's very easy for an uprising to come out of the other side that you have.
Or you will be no better than a tributary of another. Yeah. So it's whenever possible, it is best to have your own arms and ability to get you into a position. That's the only way to be respected and to actually have a firm grasp on power from the beginning.
And Andrew, what's your great example of a modern day struggle?
The modern day struggle. I mean, everyone could look right now. It's probably better to discuss it later, but because he really gets into the mercenary issue.
Yeah, he does.
But for the modern day,
uprising in a modern day scenario where there's mercenaries involved.
Yeah, right now you have Russia with the Wagner group over there, and that whole issue is discussed. I mean, if you read this book and you look at the Wagner issue, it basically is explained in this book perfectly how mercenary leaders behave, how if they ever have any reason to question you or they're upset about anything, your only two options are to find a way to get rid of the current leader or you're going to be at war with them. So
essentially
found a way.
By setting yourself up with mercenaries to do your dirty work, you're essentially setting up an internal civil conflict that will have to play out at some point.
And you could argue that their lack of success right now, their overall success, is because mercenaries aren't necessarily incentivized to actually push as hard.
Well, yeah, what do you gain other than money by fighting a war where you're getting paid?
Well, and if you die, you don't get the money.
Right.
So, I mean, the exact scenario for the Wagner group is kind of described in this book, where you have initially good gains, good enough to justify your wages, and then after that, the willingness to fight is a little bit more diminished, so you're not making as good of ground. And you could argue that the fact that they took Crimea, back around what year was that? I forget, but
that was during
it was around 2015, 2014-ish, right?
It was during the second term of Obama.
Yeah, so they managed to take Crimea very effectively, and now they're struggling in the Donbass region. So you can question the motives and reasoning there.
Yeah, I mean Machiavelli very clearly describes why this is a bad plan to use mercenaries to fight war, because at the end of the day, a mercenary is only motivated by a paycheck, and if that paycheck goes away because they died, well, there's no money there right? So
Mm-hmm.
the motivation is to move slowly and make as much money as possible. All
Mm-hmm.
right. So concerning those who obtain a principality by wickedness, this was very interesting to me because
Mm-hmm.
it describes somebody who has essentially connived their way to the top, and the fortune of those who do that are the most likely they're going to be betrayed at some point
It's
because
very brutal at the end because you don't instill loyalty because you have none yourself.
you've backstabbed enough people to get to the
Mhm.
top, so you should
You're
expect to
going to
be
be hated.
backstabbed.
You're going to be hated. It's inevitable, right? So, it, because of that, you're unlikely to be a
You're not going to
lovable
inspire
leader.
people to follow you.
Yeah.
More than likely, you're going to inspire rebellion at some point.
Yeah. Yo.
The next one is concerning a civil principality. This is where a leading citizen becomes the prince of the country,
Mm-hmm.
not by wickedness or any intolerable violence, but by favor of his fellow citizens.
Usually through the defense of your city and war.
This is actually what Castruccio Castracani did. Although he did have a royal bloodline, he was not royal by birth because he was not
Mm-hmm.
technically part of the family. He was just raised by the family. But anyways, he rises up to prominence through the mentorship that he had, and then proves himself in battle and defense of the place. And eventually, the people want him to be the prince, and so he ends up commanding the entire area. But
Mm-hmm.
that's why I said this is like the perfect example perfect example for the book, especially at the end where he's essentially showing what a perfect prince could be.
Yo.
But this is probably the best way for a prince to rise and a principality to form, is where the people actually want that person in charge of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then that creates the potential for a strong hereditary bloodline, provided that that is established.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything you want to say about that?
No, I mean he talks in, I think it's in those 2 chapters we just discussed. He talks about cruelty,
Yeah.
and he said he's not against cruelty, so to speak,
But it needs to
but
be swift,
it needs to be early on, swift, short-lived, and decisive.
where everybody who survives the cruelty should expect that they are not going to get cruelty later.
Yes, like it was.
It's kind
it
of like
was,
when you fire people at a job. You want to do it once, and you want to do it as deep as necessary.
Yeah, you don't want to have to keep coming back because you create unease and insecurity, which causes people to think they're next, which then causes them to view you as an enemy that they have to put down before you put them down, right?
Exactly.
So if you are to be cruel, he's not even endorsing cruelty, which I think this is one of the things that gets him most misunderstood. He says it is a tool that can be used early, but it has to be used correctly and it has to stop. There has to be an end to said cruelty.
Yeah. Because if you continue on, you become a vindictive,
Yeah.
tyrannical leader.
And looking at it through a modern lens, right? You could say I guess you could say World War II was caused by said cruelty not being swift and decisive, right?
Yeah.
World War One, the terms of that treaty were very long in their punishment, to the point that you kind of made the breeding ground for what came next. You created
absolutely.
the conditions 100%. So if you wanted it, you need to take that lump sum payment or that territory immediately as punishment and then just be like, okay, we're good now. We took what we wanted. So
All right. So the next one's important. Concerning the way in which the strength of all principalities ought to be measured.
if I remember correctly, that was good laws and good armies.
Yes.
Yeah.
He starts this chapter off by saying, the first case has been discussed, but we'll speak of it again and recur. The second case is one can say nothing except to encourage such princes to provision to fortify their town. So this is discussing essentially whether or not the prince can hold the town he's in charge of, and whether or not the people will fight for him.
Yeah, so, the concept here is good laws mean the people like you.
Yeah.
And a good army means you can defend it. So if you have good laws, the people will like you, which means you'll have the ability to field your own army, which will mean you have a good army and it will not be appetizing for anyone to attack you because your civilians are actually going to fight with you, not against you.
Right. Where there's unrest, an enemy can come in and usurp.
Well, that's who was the example? Well, Cesare Borgia, when he takes and attacks one of the countesses, no one liked her, and the civilians revolted against her and assisted Cesare in actually taking over the city. I don't believe it's an example in here in this specific chapter. It is definitely one, though, that was used.
I do like how he spends the time to talk about ecclesiastical principalities, which is basically just discussing how the ascension of the Pope in Rome occurs, how the papal states exist, and that the tradition of the Roman papal states, it basically has outlived any pope and any character, at least at the time of this.
He basically describes it in the sense that the tradition itself is the hereditary bloodline.
Right. And it replaces a hereditary bloodline through tradition.
Yeah. It is possible to have a tradition and a custom that is just as powerful.
Correct. Yep. And I thought it was interesting that he took the time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But there's not really a whole lot. Because
he was gearing this book towards the current pope as well as his family. So he was giving some... It's kind of like how republics were a little bit too, when you think about it. So...
Then he gets into your favorite subject here, Andrew. How many kinds of soldiery there are, and concerning mercenaries.
I mean,
so
you
this
got
is where he really
the
discusses. Yeah, he really discusses that mercenary captains are either capable men or they are not, and if they are, you cannot trust them because they always aspire to their own greatness, either by oppressing you, who are their master, or others contrary to your intentions. But if the captain is not skillful, you are ruined in the usual way, which is losing a battle.
Yep, you'll lose, and you'll just slowly grind yourself out of all the territory that you have and resources because they're expensive, and they'll demand more money as you are losing battles because they'll want to leave.
It's like paying money to the mafia for protection, you know?
Yeah.
The mafia
so they might actually protect you a bit better.
They do, but they don't, because the mafia will always demand money whether they protect you or not.
That's fair. They'll never protect you from the...
You don't own the mafia. The mafia owns you.
That is true. And they won't stop the health inspector from coming over because he has enough, power within that they can't really fight.
Then he gets into concerning auxiliaries, mixed soldiery, and one's own,
in
which he describes that obviously one's own men are the best, followed by the mixed soldiery is okay, but if you're using a strictly auxiliary, you're not gonna. The success is low.
It comes down to: are your troops your own? Yes or no? Are you borrowing troops from another ruler? If
you are, then they're only there as long as it's advantageous to the ally.
Yeah, and in that entire thing, you have to be concerned that are you just a pretext for the other ruler to take over? Because once he takes over, you're at his mercy altogether. He doesn't actually have to put you on the throne.
Right.
Not really. And as one of his examples is Cesare Borgia again, where he's taking and using the French soldiers to conquer regions, and the French king has to halt Cesare Borgia's advance because he doesn't want him to advance any further, and because he doesn't have his own soldiers at that time, he has to just obey, even though he had the advantage and could have conquered way more stuff.
And then he ends the chapter discussing, and if the first disaster to the Roman Empire should be examined, it will be found to have commenced only with the enlisting of the Goths, because from that time the vigor of the Roman Empire began to decline. All that valor which it had raised, it passed away to others. Yeah,
no, it's more than that. It's your decline as an empire, as a principality, as whatever, as a nation. It declines the moment you are no longer able to have your own army. That's the true start of the decline. So, I mean, we could draw some questions here, right? Is with America, our actual general fitness as a nation to even serve in the armed forces is pretty declining. It's declining, right? In Iraq and Afghanistan, we even started to use mercenaries ourselves, Blackwater, for example. So there's question marks. Are we as robust as we once were?
I mean, we still have. I don't know. I don't want to get into that subject. That's a very
Hey,
mixed
man,
bag. That's an
I'm just
extremely
saying.
mixed bag. I guess if
Have you
if
looked at the stats though? If we needed to have a
here,
draft,
but the thing that you forget is, I think if you're using mercenaries not for the point of capturing or taking over a territory, I mean, you're not really using them to defend one's own land at that point, nor are you using them to maintain land you've conquered. So it's
okay,
very different.
I agree completely that that is different. Also, we were already failing the first one of the early principles by having to use a standing army in a location to try to govern it.
Yeah.
So that's a different issue. I'm talking more so about the actual physical fitness of our average American male. If there was to be a draft, it would be a terrible time for the people having to actually sort through everyone who's registered.
Well, I think that would actually go with the next chapter potentially, that which concerns a prince on the subject of the art of war.
Yeah.
Because it talks about how men can rise from private station to rank. It also discusses, let's see here.
Well, the next section, he advises that rulers should go hunting and learn the land and also read
Yes.
history
Okay.
for
Yeah.
lessons and models. Because if you understand the land, you understand how to defend your land. You understand the actual scenarios of what your troops will actually experience when they're marching. Say, you know, this marsh exists, and if your troops weigh a certain amount because of all their armor, they're going to get stuck in the mud. Just simple concepts like that, right? And then
Right.
if you know history, you also learn new ideas on how to leverage that which other people have leveraged in the past.
So it does talk about this. It says that knowledge is useful in two ways. Firstly, he learns to know his own country, better able to undertake
Mm-hmm.
its own defense. But afterwards, by means of the knowledge of your own locality, you can apply that to the locality of the places you're
Mm-hmm.
conquering. Because if you have a mountain is a mountain is a mountain. It's easy
Yeah.
to use a mountain in the same way in a different country as an advantage point in a war.
Same with the swamp.
Rivers, plains, marshes,
Yeah.
etc., etc., etc. So yeah, and then we go on to the next one. It says concerning things for which men and especially princes are praised or blamed.
This is a really good. I really liked this and the next.
Chapter.
We should just discuss these ones all in one as one because concerning things for which
Oh
men,
yeah,
and
liberality,
especially
meanness.
princes,
Yep.
are praised or blamed, concerning liberality and meanness, concerning cruelty and clemency. These are all the same thing. He just talks specifically to each one in
Yeah.
the chapters, and I thought this was the most insightful thing, which every politician we've ever had seems to forget, not realize. It's you set yourself up for failure when you base decisions on how people should act versus how they actually live.
Yeah.
And if you look at every major entitlement program we've ever made as a nation, it is always based on how people should act,
Not based on how people actually
not
live.
based on reality, not based on, because if it was, right, those programs would be to keep as much of the decision making local so that people would have a local accountability by people who actually know who are gaming the system and who aren't, right?
But when
But
you centralize the authority over these programs, where it's impossible for the person who's in charge of it to see how
yeah,
it's being
we've
used.
eliminated the people who actually know and have an accountability, the ability to hold people accountable, right? There's none of that with how we design the programs. So we've made a decision where everyone's going to be idealistic here. They're
But
not going
nobody
to
is,
use the
or
system.
rather, not nobody, but most people are not.
Yeah, I mean,
Which is honestly one of the reasons why it's always been a concern for governments in general and the formation of which, how they are formed, where you don't want a mob mentality in charge. Mob mentality is not the ideal generally. Mob mentality is the flavor of the day.
it's going to be flavor of the day, and it's always going to be a 51% decision that governs the end of the day, and you're going to then have civil strife in the streets because it very quickly gets very polarized.
Yeah.
That's the nature of mob rule democracy. when it's not a republic and there's not a general distribution to make sure you have the majority of communities approving of it. And by communities, we mean localities. That's, you know what I'm saying? Like, if that's why we have an electoral college, it's to make sure that we have a bigger representation of land mass and communities, therefore. So, another one, though, Chris, the next step was generosity isn't appreciated unless
No.
unless lavish, which will result in meanness to finance. Meanness is okay because it allows generous and kind policy, because you are allowing people to keep more of their own fruits of their labor. It is viewed as kindness, even though your actual laws seem mean. So it's whereas if you're just handing out money all the time, you have to tax everybody who works to be able to pay
Well, it
for
did
it.
also state that like anybody who is truly of the liberal sort in a princely role will end up penniless,
Yeah,
zero money,
or
because you're handing out
and
too much.
and having to grab money from their
You end up
citizenry.
increasing taxation long
Yeah,
term
and then you're viewed as
significantly.
cruel anyways, and not just cruel, but like meritless in your cruelty, because you seem incompetent.
Somebody who holds responsibility in the fiduciary realm and is not taking as much money from their citizens will be looked at kindly.
Hmm. And
Even
it's
though at the initial onset you will look cruel because you're not
yeah,
handing money out to, say, the poor
but in
or.
the long run, you will be viewed as kind because of the prosperity that your meanness brings about. It's I guess the best way to describe the praise versus blame qualities is that they tend to you tend to have an initial reputation that is the opposite of reality,
Yeah.
and over time people tend to see the truth. So if you are governed by a high time preference to the point that you need to be loved immediately, you can't stand on a deeper principle of what you know is right, just and proper, then you're going to fall to, I guess, being arbitrary, and you're not going to get that long-term benefit because you're going to have bad policies which get you hated long term. So you might
Hence why
be,
people who know they have a short term are more likely to be
yeah,
liberal than
yeah,
liberal in the sense of what this book describes, which
well,
is somebody who is trying to gain popularity quickly by handing out money
you'll be lavish and ignoring long-term responsibilities.
or penalties. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You won't think of consequences at all.
So the next one is concerning the way in which princes should keep the
Oh, well, we
faith.
forgot the cruelty part.
Oh, go ahead.
So, like we said earlier, he talks about how it needs to be swift, decisive, and then done, because conspiracies require envy, hatred, and contempt.
Yeah.
Must be perceived as popular with the people, or conspirators will not be willing to share their views and are not going to be willing to execute their views. So, unless you are hated by your populace, no one's going to really conspire against you unless they're ready to go to full out war and take on your entire citizenry.
Yeah, and he starts off by saying Cesare Borgia was considered cruel, notwithstanding his cruelty reconciled. Is it Romagna? Is that how you pronounce that? Romagna?
Yeah.
Right. Unified it and restored it to peace and loyalty.
And then on that part that one should avoid being despised and hated, this is where you really can tell that he is a Republican in the sense of a person who likes
Governing body.
a republic form of government. And he also described himself in other documents as a libertarian. So he said you should avoid being hated by respecting property and the honor of your citizenry.
Yeah, he also talks about not stealing people's spouses.
Yeah, don't. Well, that's a direct comparison, I guess, to how even the Brits treated the um, Scottish. They would do that whole right to, yeah, all sorts of terrible things. It, but it's honoring your citizens, keeping their honor by not stealing their property, right? Like, you don't want to slight them. You don't want to make them feel like you don't trust them or anything, which is where he talks about disarming your citizens is extremely stupid. He
Yeah.
says arming your citizens is good. It makes them loyal. Disarming them upsets them and shows you don't trust them, and they can't trust you. So Machiavelli is a massive pro Second Amendment individual.
Yeah. Well, I mean, technically, yes. I mean,
I mean, to the extreme.
right. I think that
He says you should hand out weapons.
the first step to um, obliterating a country is disarming the citizens. That is a fact. Anybody with a regime who has tried to destroy what was there will disarm and then destroy. Because if
Yeah,
they're
and
armed, it's way harder to destroy
you know,
that country.
it makes it that much harder to obliterate you in the ability to control you if you are attacked.
Yeah. There's a reason why Roman citizens got treated the way that they did versus all the conquered countries. Because if you were a Roman citizen, there was an assumed trust, and you were armed, you got a fair trial. If you weren't, then you were, subjugated, and they take away your ability to revolt and all that other stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a thing though where he's all about handing out weapons as many as possible because he wants there to be a citizen army.
Yeah, standing army at all times, ready to go.
Yeah. Basically, the entire purpose of America's Second Amendment is a Machiavellian principle.
Pretty much. So the next thing here, though, is concerning. Let's see here. Where was it? Nope. Keep the faith. Basically, he states that there's a way to keep the faith, but also there's a recognized ability to discern when keeping the faith is going to just destroy your country.
Yeah, I mean,
it's hard to explain in a way that makes sense. But basically, a prince who holds himself to the same moral values of his citizens is unable to think more deeply about what the right move is necessarily. I think that's kind of what he's trying to say. And I don't necessarily agree with him on this one.
You need to act.
But I can understand why he might think this is the correct course of action.
He says you need to act in the best interest of your nation, basically. So this is where he's okay with you disregarding a treaty if it does not serve your interests.
This is kind of like the idea of where the death penalty might come into play, where the faith might say you can't use the death penalty, but you recognize there's a danger to your citizens and you ignore it and go ahead with it. And I'm not saying one way or the other on the death penalty. I don't really have an opinion on it. I'm just saying that might be a thing where even though keeping your faith would require you to not enforce the death penalty, you might do it anyways.
Is this where he also discusses though about how you should
appear merciful, faithful, humane, or religious, and be so with a mind so framed that you should not require yourself to be so?
He's willing. Yeah, you're willing to make exceptions in the right moment, but he also we forgot to discuss though where he talks about how you should align yourself with other small nations.
Only nations smaller than you.
Only nations smaller than you. But if one of those nations is attacked, right? Even if they are to lose, when you're talking specifically about your neighbors, right?
Right.
Even if they would lose with your assistance, it's better to be their friend and ally in that conflict than to just hold off and hope that the bigger nation doesn't attack you next, because they will attack you next, and you will not have the other smaller nation as a compatriot in misery and potentially revolt and revolution against the bigger nation later. So you need to also be willing to sacrifice a lot of be willing to lose in order to win long term is part of his moral there, because you have to have the right friends.
So the next chapter I think we've kind of discussed already is that one should avoid being despised and hated for all the reasons we already discussed.
There was but he gets into a little bit more
conspiracies.
There's a couple more things where He talks about how I forget which chapter it is, but he talks about a ruler must adapt with the times, prepare in advance for storms, and not rely on luck. All approaches can be successful if it matches the circumstances. Now that was one of the key things I think that was in that.
This kind of plays into the fourth
chapter.
turning a little bit.
It is, yeah. No, that's what I was thinking when I read it. He's just like, sometimes boldness is the right approach. Sometimes it's going to fail. Rulers, based on what the circumstances of the times are, could have the exact same approach and fail miserably.
Yep.
But it's the same thing that worked previously in history.
Absolutely.
That when it comes to the avoid being hated thing, though, because he likes to go through this a lot. And another one of them was a ruler must show that he admires achievement in others, giving work and reward based on merit, must reassure his subject that they can go calmly about their business without worrying that success will be punished. Instead, he should incentivize those who bring prosperity. So he's taking a merchant, a town, a burger approach to it, right? But it's just one of those things where don't be communist. That's literally what I read in that is don't be communist.
Even though the intro to your book talks about how communists.
No, okay, yeah.
We'll do that at the end. Let's do that.
Yeah, we'll talk that later. It's silly.
All right. So chapter 20 now is our fortresses. This chapter I actually found very interesting. Our fortresses and many other things to which princes often resort advantageous or hurtful. And he's like, it depends. It depends.
It depends on your strategy. Do you want conflict with your citizens? If your plan involves conflict with your citizens,
you need a fortress.
You need fortresses because fortresses are primarily to control your populace.
It's like having a giant prison, essentially.
Yeah, and a country that is safely comfortable with its citizens and the citizen army is better off without fortresses because then it leaves nothing for the enemy that's invading you to use against you.
Yeah.
There's no means to control the territory.
Nor do the citizens take it and then use it as a
nor is it a rebellious means either. So if you are planning to have a more laissez-faire approach to your citizens and let them have freedom without cruel taxes, you're better off not building fortresses. Maybe a castle or so in the city isn't the worst idea.
Especially if you're going to live there.
Yeah, especially if you're going to live there. But, just a fortress that controls, the pass, the valley, it's not necessarily...
It's like putting up a toll booth. It's not helping your citizens.
Yeah.
All right. How a prince should conduct himself so as to gain renown. And the opening sentence here is, nothing makes a prince so much esteemed as great enterprises and setting a fine example.
Mm-hmm.
We have in our time Ferdinand of Aragon, present
king
of Spain.
That's where I was also saying about, I think that's where he talks about admiring achievement, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, a prince ought to, above all things, always endeavor in every action to gain for himself the reputation of being a great and remarkable man.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, I agree. And this one discusses a lot of things along what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
But it also says, he ought to hold such bodies in esteem and associate with them sometimes, and show himself an example of courtesy and liberality, nevertheless always maintaining the majesty of his rank. For this he must never consent to abate in anything.
Yeah. And then that's where we get into concerning the secretaries of princes and how flatterers should be avoided.
Oh, yeah.
And 100%. Those two go together hand in hand. A ruler, he talks about how rulers are judged for the ministers they choose. It doesn't matter.
Well, it says you must let your servants know that they cannot stand alone. Never let your servant usurp you.
Yeah, but it's also this thing where they don't stand alone because they are your representative to the people. It doesn't matter if your local sheriff is abusive of power or not. You're going to blame the ruler for that sheriff's behavior because he appointed him, right?
Which means that in the case where you have a bad sheriff, it's within the duties of the prince to remove him.
Yes, as soon as possible. That's where he talks about
You must
admiring.
recognize the danger before it arises.
Yeah, and you have to. That's why you have to admire achievement in others and give reward for good behavior, like for good work, right?
Right.
Reward prosperity. You should avoid advisors who are simply flatterers. He says you need to instill that they should be able to challenge your ideas prior to the decision being made, so that they raise concerns, and you can actually get all sides of the argument. He talks about I think it was the one Holy Roman Empire king, whichever one that was, and how he never actually successfully implemented any of his ideas because he was so secretive that he would not get any critical thinking involved in those decisions. So he would come out with an idea, people would tell him why it didn't work, and then he would just give up on it instead of ironing it out in the beginning and then unveiling it.
Yeah, and I did like the end line discussing how flatterers should be avoided, where he says, "Therefore, it must be inferred that good counsels, whencesoever they come, are born of the wisdom of the prince, not the wisdom of the prince from the good counsels."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's where they give you advice on your terms.
Yeah,
That's the thing. Like they know that there's a place for the advice, and not everyone is permitted to give you that advice.
absolutely.
It's for his counsel to give him advice and behind closed doors when it's appropriate, not challenging him in public. That was the key there.
Yep.
And then he talks about why the princes of Italy have lost their states and what fortune can affect in human affairs and how to withstand her and Italy from the barbarian. Okay, yeah, he's this. These last three kind of go hand in hand, where it's about the seizing the opportunities and how Cesare Borgia was the closest one, except he made a mistake in the sense that there was one thing that could happen that he didn't plan for,
That he
and
died young.
no,
That his dad died, right?
his dad died and he was ill, and then he allowed someone who should never have been put into the papacy
That's right.
get the position of pope. So
Yeah, it was the one person who could make it bad for him.
basically, and he talks about all the princes in Italy and how they just always fought with each other. They always allied with bigger nations to their own detriment.
Right.
Yeah,
So.
and the reliance on mercenaries, basically. He just kind of reiterates everything that we've discussed previously. He just puts it into good examples. He also
The end of the book is a lot of examples of the goods and the bads and adhering to his ideas in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I did find it strange when we discussed the intros and how the W.K. Marriott intro seems very on point, whereas the intro to your book sounds fascinating in that it has nothing to do with the book.
No, it goes through his life, and then the part that I talked to you about was just the ending where it talks about how people liked to reference him. I mean, he's clearly misunderstood. He's viewed as this person who advocated evil and cruelty, and
Which it doesn't seem to be that he does at all.
He does not advocate it at all. If anything, he advocates being as limited as possible in cruelty and to do it only early on when you're
only when necessary.
Only when necessary, and primarily when establishing the new order, right? It's which typically that's because you need to subdue something, which could have been a previously cruel regime in its own right? So I think it's a very you got to realize that this was written in an era where most of the governments at the time were monarchies, and he's not talking about an all-powerful monarchy in this book at all. He's talking about the vulnerabilities of monarchy and how they should behave more as benevolent rulers who allow more republic-style governance within their towns and cities.
Well, it's far easier to convince somebody of the achievement of the of allegiance when they have more freedom.
Yeah.
Because if you tell somebody you're free to do what you want in my kingdom, well, of course you're going to swear fealty to that kingdom.
Well, not just that though. It's that whole concept of, yeah, you have freedom here. Your prosperity is because I have this opportunity for you to pursue it and not be oppressed. I'm not taking all your money from you. You have more inherent wealth for every hour you work. It's also, if you don't work hard and you don't put in the effort, it's your own fault. I'm
Work
not
hard, play
here.
hard.
Yeah, but as a king, if you're going by these principles, you're not, pushing your thumb down on all of these serfs. You're
Yeah,
not
biting
treating
your
them like
thumb
garbage.
at all of your servants, as the Shakespeareans would say.
The, but it's really funny how misunderstood he is, because even in my introduction, I was telling you previously that, I mean, he's declared himself previously as a Republican and a libertarian.
Republican in the
As in
sense of form of governments.
the classical sense, okay?
Yes.
Everyone should realize this is the classical sense. There was no Republican Party at this time. It's purely a form of governance.
I just
All
want to make
right.
sure we're talking about Plato's Republic, not
Yeah. And
the
then
Republican Party.
even a communist leader saw the prince and interpreted it as looking forward to the dictatorship of the proletariat. And it's just like, did you not read this book? Like, did you not read it?
No, they didn't.
How could any communist read this book and be like, yeah, it's pro-communist? It's like, no, it's pro not
I
having
mean, communists claim they've read the Bible, but I doubt it.
I'm just saying it's a pro. This is pro private property and pro freedom book to the like extreme, to the sense that he wants you to arm your citizens. I mean, yeah, communists say they want to arm their citizens too, but it's
But they
hard to
don't.
it's hard to confiscate the property of others when they're also armed. So there's no way that dictatorship and the prince actually works together, because it's just, no, it just doesn't.
Like, yeah, I agree with you there. I think in the literal sense, you could apply the concepts in this book to most forms of government, but communism is not one of those.
I mean, the only principle you could put on communism would literally be the cruelty. Make it as brief, like the principles
Make
of
it as brief
cruelty.
as possible when you
Yeah,
take
because
over.
they are very brutal, and they try to make it brief, I think, in what they do. It's just there's such a massive shift.
I've never seen a form of communism where they don't continuously be terrorizing their citizens.
But that's because their goal is too large for them to be decisive and brief with the cruelty.
The only way that I've ever heard of communism working is in small communities.
Well, that's because you need to know everybody and have accountability.
Yeah, that's the only way.
It's a commune. It's not even communist. It's not really communism.
Well, communes, by their definition, are communist.
Well, yeah, but at that point, okay, at that point, if we want to go there, it's the same. You have to have the argument of the anarchists, where a clan or a tribe isn't really a form of government, Chris. So
it's a family or friends affair.
It's a family or friend group. So yeah, I mean, I
That's
disagree with that. I'm willing to agree with you that is a form of governance. I'm just saying,
it's a very small one.
Yeah, because I think family is
with real accountability.
Yeah, I mean, okay, when we look at it though, communism violates like every single principle of this book.
It does. Oh, yeah.
Every single one.
There's no way that you could say this book. Let's put it this way.
It doesn't admire
If I had the choice between Machiavellian and Malthusian governance, I'm choosing Machiavellian every time.
I mean, yeah, Machiavelli is not anywhere near Malthusian at all. Which that's the real evil. I don't understand how Machiavelli is.
We should read the Malthus book.
Ugh. I mean,
I kind of want to.
I'm willing to, but I find it hilarious how Machiavelli seems to have a worse reputation than Malthusians.
Malthusian should. Well, the thing is like Malthusian, in the same way that, but also it's starting with a worse base. But it's been used in the same way that Machiavelli has, where they distort what's there and pretend it's something it's not. Because Malthusians have moved on from what Malthus was actually concerned with into new things that he was not at all concerned with. And claimed
I mean, They
and
just like,
claim that he's like, this is Malthusian. No, it's not. He didn't say any of these things you guys decided.
well, it's his style, man.
It is his style.
It's anti people.
They're applying what he said to something he didn't say.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I just did it in a sense with Machiavelli endorses the United States Second Amendment, except he wants it to be a guaranteed right of a gun.
Yeah,
That's
so
handed out by the government.
without me knowing exactly when guns were first invented, I don't know if you would have known.
Did they have a form of a gun back then? Maybe. I can't. What year was it? They had cannons. They had cannons. No, they did.
Trebuchet.
Yeah. So I mean, he was there. He knew about the technology. It wasn't that foreign to him. He said, "Arm your citizens, man." That's all I can say.
He did say that. I think at the end of the day, a lot of the principles of this book, the ideals that he strives for, can easily be applied to most modern forms of government, minus communism. And let me put it this way: anywhere there's centralized power, you could easily apply the principles to have a good governance and affiliation with your citizens.
It's a book about restraint. Let's be honest. It's a book about restraint in power.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's really what it is, right? It's your responsibilities.
Who knew Spider-Man was Machiavellian?
I mean,
sorry.
We forgot one thing, though.
What's that?
He talks about factions.
Should we talk about the dedication, though?
What?
The dedication. That was a big
We forgot to bring it up. I kind of brought it up. He wrote it. He dedicated it to a Medici.
Yeah. Magnificent Lorenzo di Piero de Medici.
Yeah.
Great show Medici is. If you want to watch a good show?
I don't know, man. I think a better
you like
show.
Borgia better, I know.
Better show would be Borgia, Faith and Fear. Much better.
But
don't watch the Showtime one. It sucks.
I was gonna say if you don't want to see all the sexual stuff,
no, there's
Medici's pretty good.
Yeah. We forgot one thing, and that was about factions and how they are bad for defense. The weaker will always betray you.
The stronger.
Yeah, they'll always betray the stronger faction. They only work in peacetime to control people, and they will fail in war.
Yeah.
So if you are a ruler who divides your populace, that doesn't unite them under shared principles, and you just try to divide your different groups of people into factions, you're weak. You're just weak. It's like
if you try to distract your subjects by creating factions which are fighting each other instead of you,
you're a low.
Your country will be easily conquered.
You are not a masculine ruler if you have to divide your factions instead of uniting them. That's basically what it's saying, and you're going to be disposed as that weakling the second you're attacked, because you're going to be betrayed by whatever group you're like dividing against.
Especially if you can't climb a flight of stairs. Anyways,
that too.
It's like riding a bike. All right, but honestly, like this book is so. I think
it should be a required reading for anyone who actually wants to be in government. Personal opinion.
I don't disagree with you. I don't. I think that it's important to keep the respect of the people you are in charge of, and in order to do that, you have to rule prudently.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you just look though at how our current elected officials are behaving, generally.
It's public theater, man.
It's a joke. It's a joke compared to what this book actually advises. In fact, you can point out multiple examples where they are just going full opposite of everything Machiavelli actually recommends. Dividing people into factions. It's the name of the game today. Having terrible magistrates. Advisors who are terrible. Look at some of our cabinet people. I mean, come on.
I don't know. All the cabinet makers I know are pretty good.
I'm talking about
working for years.
Okay, Chris. Good job, Chris. Distort it.
Bad jokes.
Terrible joke. I mean, talking about not wanting your citizens armed.
Yeah.
not wanting to respect property. Not,
Eminent domain, my friend.
you got people
Or
who,
eminent domain.
well, not just that. There's also the asset forfeiture if you're found with like cash and they claim it's related to drugs or whatever. If they suspect you're doing a crime, they can just take your assets. No due process there.
Right.
I mean, even okay, Trump. I have a bone to pick with Trump on this. Avoid simple flatterers. He never avoided a flatterer in his life.
Nor has any president in our lifetime. So there's
No,
that.
that's true. That's true. They're all egomaniacs. I'm just saying, like, I can bring complaints against both sides of the aisle. Like the current one is a bit more drastic. I mean,
The thing.
generosity isn't appreciated unless lavish. I mean, look, they're just throwing away money because they want to appear generous and be liked.
I'm surprised that I'm the one that suggested this book and it wasn't you. I'm actually kind of surprised about this.
I'm a little surprised after reading it, yeah, but
So here's the question for you. All right, I think this has been a pretty good deep dive so far.
Yeah.
Where would you rank this book? What?
Oh, this is a 5, and I think there should be a law that requires you to read it before you actually get elected to office. That's where I put this book.
I think that would eliminate half of Congress because I don't think they can read.
I was gonna say literacy. Does that count as a literacy test? I guess maybe that's frowned upon. But
definitely not the one with the Communist Manifesto in it, though. Get the one without that.
Anyways,
I give it a 5 as well, actually.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a 5. There's nothing to complain about it. In my opinion, it's so straight and to the point, and it makes very valid points.
And if you can somehow manage to get it, because I don't know how you're going to get it these days, get the version I have. It's The Prince. It's W.K. Marriott. It's Books A Million produced this copy. If you can find a W.K. Marriott translation, though, probably your best bet if finding something without the weird communist thing in it. But this one had the 2 examples at the end, which are also on this Gutenberg.org. If you just follow this link, I guess, that's in the URL right here, you'll find the version I read.
Could we say that the one complaint someone could have of Machiavelli is his love of Borgia? Like, he is a controversial figure, a bit of a maniac. He's definitely on the cruel side at times. He's also distorted because most of the
he's following his principles, Andrew. He's making friends with the guy with the bigger country.
Well, I'm just saying he's not wrong when he says that Cesare Borgia probably could have become king of Italy if he had, survived that one illness properly. But it's such that one TV series though is so good. You should watch it.
I will consider it if I have a Showtime subscription, which I don't believe.
No, it's not on.
I'm just kidding. Where is it at? Where is that again? Netflix.
Actually, it's not free anywhere right now, and you can't watch season 3. So you'd probably really hate the fact that. Yeah, no, this is a massive thing that I hate. Is season 3 I can't even buy it anywhere. I would have to also buy a foreign DVD player to be able to buy the DVDs. I can't get an American version of this show.
Why are the rights like completely? What is it, Borgia?
I don't know. So when I first watched it, it was on Netflix, all 3 seasons.
Borgia's what? What's it called?
It's Borgia, Faith and Fear.
Faith and Fear.
So you can buy season 1 and 2 through Amazon or Apple or Google. And if you want to buy season 3, you have to live in Australia or Europe.
Yep. Well, apparently you can't buy season 1 or 2 in Amazon right now.
I own it on Amazon.
Well, you already own it.
Oh, well, I know you can buy it on Apple.
Hold on.
So it is available on Apple. It's like $8 for each season. But as far as season 3 goes, the only place I see it advertised on sale is through the Google Play Store in Australia.
It's not the Borgia's Borgia Faith and Fear.
Okay. Yeah, it's Borgia Faith and Fear. Don't watch the Showtime one.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I can't buy it, but I understand that you're saying it's available. And for those that want to see something where I think Niccolo Machiavelli has a character in the show, right?
He is in the show. Yeah.
There you go. So it is applied to this exact discussion.
Yeah. No, it is very
Do you feel
applicable.
like he was portrayed well based on reading his book?
You know, he's a diplomat in the book. It's not in the show,
Is this
and
during the time when he reigns in Florence?
he's a diplomat for Florence.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's kind of a advisor at times to Borgia. Not like it. There's a little bit of conflict between them at one point because he doesn't get the support he needs because he's willing to not go to his aid.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's. I'm just telling you, it's a really good show. Has a lot of actors in it that ended up having pretty good careers
Is it
afterwards.
better than the Tudors?
Oh yeah,
Because
oh yeah.
I did actually like that.
That's on Showtime. Those Showtime, like Tudors was good, but this is way better.
There was some things I didn't care for in Tudors, but I thought the show was good overall. All
No,
right.
okay, I'm telling you, Chris.
So I'm going to
you
say
like it.
every person who's watching this, and I know there's a bunch of you on Rumble, read it. The
You should
Prince.
read it, and if you're into politics at all, you'll find a bajillion ways to complain even more about your current politician.
You'll
It's-
feel more educated on this.
I guarantee if you read this book, you'll be more educated than they are, 100%.
And I would vote for you over the people currently in office,
Yeah.
provided that you've understood the book.
As long as you can tell me what this book means, I would 100% vote for you over 90%. We should also, because we kind of brought it up earlier, he does kind of have fourth turning vibes with a couple parts of his advice
You
about
have to line up with where your place in history. With the place in your
make sure
decisions.
you're aligned with the times and that you actually are understanding the circumstances.
That's not a modernity thing. That's a more of a understanding the feeling of the culture of the time you're ruling.
Yeah.
Not,
you have to.
Not that you're with the times, as they would say.
No,
the
it's that
fads
you
of the
understand.
era.
You understand what strategy is going to work. What are the sensibilities of people? Is
Doesn't
someone
mean join the disco in the 70s.
yes, but at that point we should just say too that we're going to be doing a review of the fourth turning because they're coming out. The author is coming out with another book where he's going to rehash it. And if you've ever read the fourth turning, I mean, it's a fascinating book to see generation theory applied directly to America. So it's going to be a good refresh. Make sure to tune in next week for that. The book, what date is when does the book come out? Is it the 18th?
I don't know, but I have a phrase for you.
Huh.
Everybody, recognize the 5th of July.
Yes, there you go.
But yeah, I think the book's come out on the 18th.
Mhm.
So we'll probably be covering not on the 19th. I think that's too soon.
No.
Maybe it's not the 18th. I don't know. It'll be the
We'll be trying to
26th.
cover it. We'll be trying to cover it the week after it comes out. That's
as best we can.
as best we can.
It is like 600 pages.
It is a lot of pages, so we'll have to see what our read time is. It's not
But it
nearly
will be
as,
within 2 to 3 weeks of
yeah,
at maximum 3 weeks, because by then somebody else will have covered it,
yeah.
and we
So
want to be first.
we want to cover it as soon as possible. We both value that book a lot, so
Yeah. So the 10 of you watching on Rumble, we appreciate you. Make sure you follow.
yes.
Since there's 10 of you watching right now, and we only have 9 followers on our channel.
follow,
for some
follow
reason.
the channel. Give us a like on the video if you've enjoyed it. I mean,
It's
I
actually
hope
the
you've-
Rumble button. It's a thumbs up.
Oh, yeah,
Likes
give us
for
a thumbs
YouTube.
up. Give us a thumbs up. I know if you're still with us for all this time, you've probably enjoyed the content. So show us a little bit of love and follow us on Twitter as well. We have,
Trailcast at Printed and Pressed.
yes.
We continuously get the yellow symbol of death on YouTube, which we currently have right now on this particular stream. Probably
Yeah,
nobody's
because-
watching.
They hate us.
YouTube clearly doesn't like people reading because, a dumb population is watching videos and a smart population is not. All right, as always, I am Chris,
And I'm Andrew.
and we will see you.
Next week.
See y'all later.